very warm welcome to all our viewers for today. Today we have a power pack panel that will share the views on can India become a global manufacturing hub. In no particular order, we have with us Ramesh, Managing Director 3M India, Mohan, Managing Director BASF India. We have Gunter, CEO and Managing Director Tata Motors. We have Sandeep with us, MD J&J Medical India. I truly welcome you all to this session and thank you so much for your time today. So before we dive into the session, let me try and give some quick context, from a panel discussion perspective. So the question that we have with us is that can India become a global manufacturing hub? The Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan lays down the government's clear intent of revamping a strong manufacturing sector for the country's long-term growth in a post-COVID-19 world. While the pandemic has spurred interest in the domestic manufacturing ecosystem, I believe the journey has just begun. India competes with the manufacturing destinations like Thailand and Vietnam, some of whom fare better on the crucial parameters, such as ease of starting a business, on land, on labor laws. And we would discuss this during the session. It seems that some of these bottlenecks in India that may be perhaps responsible for its relatively weaker standing as it compared to its regional peers when companies are assessing offshoring initiatives, alternatives there. When you look at the some of the data with respect to 2018 and 19, there were about 56 companies that moved bases from China. And one would not help to notice that more than 50% of them relocated to Vietnam and 40% plus relocated to Taiwan and Thailand. And out of 56, only 3 companies actually decided to relocate to India. As we progress on the manufacturing journey that the government has intended and the industry is taking on board as well, believe that providing easier access to land, incentivizing innovation and R&D, and also further investment in reskilling efforts may be some of the prerequisites for India to realize its goal of becoming a global manufacturing hub. With this, let me go over to my esteemed panel members and get the views as well on the India's journey towards becoming a global manufacturing hub. So Ramesh and Mohan, starting with Ramesh first, before we get into the India specifics, it might just be helpful for all of our viewers to get a quick perspective from you that if your company was to further expand its manufacturing footprint in Asia for exports, what would be the 3 or 4 drivers, crucial drivers that you would like to focus on before deciding on a preferred country? Ramesh, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Neeraj. 3M at 3M, we are essentially a material science company. And a lot of what we do is also based on where our customers are and what our customers do, because we supply materials which go into the end product of our customers in most cases. So even if you roll the clock back for a few years and see several years, in fact, and see what happened in Japan, what happened in China, in Japan with the automotive industry or with the electronics industry, a lot of it started manufacturing in Japan to serve our customers in Japan. And then as those customers moved around the world, whether in Asia or Europe or even in the United States, I think our manufacturing facilities, our support followed that. So a lot of our decisions on, and this is also true for China. In China, when 3M invested back in 1983, a lot of our manufacturing in China was directed to customers in China. There could have been global customers who came into China to manufacture there, and then our manufacturing footprint followed what they did. So what I'm essentially saying is in many instances, we follow our customers and expand our footprint in the country. So in the case of India, as we prioritize sectors, we bring in, let's say, anchor OEMs, so to speak, or lead OEMs in specific sectors into India. Mobile handheld manufacturing is a great example. Then we would follow it with the necessary manufacturing because we do have a lot of participation in that industry. The other considerations would, of course, be ease of movement in and out of the country for product. IP protection. I mean, these would be availability of skilled labor for sure. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Ramesh, for that. So Mohan, coming to you, Ramesh focused on the fact that, given the kind of the setup the industry has, so they follow the customers. And if the OEMs are deciding to move in a particular location, that's where the lead would follow for them. Mohan, from your perspective?
Well, BASF being a chemical company and pretty much similar to what Ramesh said, I would build on that because Ramesh happens to be one of my key accounts. In that context, we do supply to the material science business. And that said, automotive happens to be our largest industry as BASF. So if you look at BASF and its portfolio across our divisions, we more or less cater to the entire industrial production that would happen in an economy. You can start basically with ag, and then you have the automotive, the construction, the paints, materials, appliances, you name it, and there would be some part of BASF in there. And now then I can get into personal care and nutrition and so on. So overall, the industrial framework or the industrial development of an economy is where BASF fits in. Once you have industrial development, you have the manufacturing industries coming in. BASF looks at it as a market. It has a critical mass that makes it attractive for BASF to get into that market. Now, once you have that, the economies of scale, Ramesh mentioned about ease of doing business, getting in and out. You have to be competitive in that economic time frame as well, because most of our chemicals can cross borders, international borders. So if you don't have a competitive manufacturing setup, you mentioned IP protection, you mentioned also skilled workforce. All these things are essential frameworks, hygiene factors, if I may say so. But key to it is you need to be economically competent, you need to have scale, and most important of all, you need to have a value chain where you can play right from oil and gas, which happens to be the starting point, into refineries, into chemicals, and then ending up into all these applications. So having a manufacturing framework and industrial framework which cuts across all these industries is kind of important for BASF. You framed a question initially about exports, and BASF typically looks at markets in the context of where the markets have critical mass, not just in terms of its own customers, but also in terms of consumption. So in that context, having a base load in the market is a strategic pillar for BASF. Yes, incremental exports can always be done because you do need the scale, and with that, export business helps to have scale. But BASF typically doesn't invest across the world thinking about, I do this as an export base only. Yeah, so it looks at it more in the context of industrial development of the economy, and how do I build that and have the economies of scale to then export from there as well.
Thanks, Mohan, for that. So we are looking at follow the customer's customer, in some sense around that area, but that's interesting there. So you did spoke about the fact that that there is a element of not only the some of the prerequisites to be done, but there is also a clear focus to see that in a sense that it has to be globally competitive, from a cost perspective there.
Absolutely.
And that's where the production kind of follow through as well there. So coming to you, Gunter, and when you answer that, just have the frame which Mohan and Ramesh have laid out for relocating a facility as well. But now when we zoom into India, looking at it from an India perspective and also from an auto sector perspective there, there is one part that I tried to say initially, that while India is doing better on the ease of doing business ranking, but on ease of starting a business point of view, we see that Thailand and Vietnam and some of these countries rank higher than us there. And then Ramesh and Mohan added on to say that there are logistics, cost competitiveness as some of the prevalent industrial framework, as one of the key parameters over there. So when you look at that, what are the 3-4 things that come to you in your mind from an auto sector perspective, when you look at, say that both from an industry point of view and the government point of view, that you would like to see to happen more?
Niraj, thanks a lot for your question, but it's possibly not that easy to answer it in a straightforward manner. And I'm afraid, listening to what has already been mentioned by the others, I'm not quite sure if there's any specific to the automotive industry as far as our expectation related to government's focus on India as a global manufacturing hub is concerned. But let me possibly start on a positive note, because we all have recently seen some movements of the governments, business-oriented, sector-specific, but also taxation reforms got introduced in order to accelerate what you have already called out, the ease of being business. With a piece of statistic we're all familiar with, India ranks now 63rd overall in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business ranking. And it's declared objective of the government to actually get into the top 50. Good news and very encouraging news. That's the reason why we have in particular seen during the lockdown multiple round of podium discussions and special events promoting India, always with the same reference: government is taking action, government is serious. But at the same point of time, as we have seen the improvement from previously 136 spot to the 63rd spot, we still get from lots of businesses which we try to attract to come to India, consistent remarks where they are saying it's easier to do business in India, but the startup is still hard to do. And if you ask what makes the startup so hard, they say it takes significant time. It's a question of cost and effort to glide through the official requirements. There is lots of visible, invisible red tape, and multiple licenses are required. So therefore, on behalf of the automotive industry, but I assume that's also valid for the other industries, also the ones on the podium, we should actually address certain priorities in order to boost manufacturing for the benefit of actually create job opportunities. It's not just about manufacturing for the sake of the same. It's for the sake of actually building jobs in order to actually feed the highly qualified workforce that gets year and year into the market, and where India needs to take care of it in order to really leverage the initial investment in education by taking advantage of the education and the skills and the talent available in the country. Let's just call me out a few ones. We certainly need, and you heard me saying it frequently, we need to have a more collaborative, a more targeted approach amongst all the stakeholders. It's not just government calls, we follow or we demand, government follows. I think we need to have an inclusive approach in order to get us all on the same page and to make sure that we work extremely well orchestrated and focused. The other one is about a seamless alignment and progression from an intention to the on-ground enforcement on all levels of the government. So it's not just good enough to hear the secretaries, the joint secretaries, the ministers, or our prime minister to make the announcements. I think we need to make sure that this message actually travels and gets executed rigorously on all of the levels of the administration. We need to call out the barriers that needs to be reduced, or better to say, to be removed. We need a less number of forms to be filed, less licenses to receive in order to support the ones who get into India with a much more simplified administrative, call it bureaucratic environment. And it would be great to have a single window of clearance to streamline the interactions with the agencies for approval and inspections. To get a little bit more practical, we need quicker timelines, better contract enforcement and quality control with certain safety mechanisms. Because often we get the feedback, could you please help? We don't know where we stand. Is there any opportunity to provide support by your governmental affairs department? So there's actually a request for hand-holding. But is it right that there's a hand-holding requirement? Would it not be better to have very simplified processes where investors can actually walk through the process without being hand-held? I think it could make lots of sense. And in particular, because of the liquidity crunch we have experienced the last 2 years, or starting 2 years ago, and meanwhile it's about to be eased and relaxed, the availability of quality credits and the related infrastructure is also an important one. Talking about India as a manufacturing hub, so for export opportunities, I think India domestically, but even more so in order to support the international business, needs to streamline its logistics. The percentage of logistic costs of our total cost, as also addressed by the government, saying 15% in average as we see it today is not competitive. It needs to be streamlined. It needs to be very seamlessly integrated. It needs to be multimodal. And we actually need more organization in the logistics sector, from transport to logistics hubs. I think this is something that would need to get utmost priority, in particular when it comes to the access to ports, in order to boost the export opportunities. So it's a long list, but I think if you reduce it, it's possibly a handful bullet points, where if we would actually go for an orchestrated effort, the industry with the government, with an inclusive approach, we can actually take the whole investment environment on top to the ease of doing business to the next level.
Thanks, Ms. Gunter. I think there was a loud focus on simplified processes, and the fact that a strong focus to come on implementation as well. Whatever's been announced, whatever is being done up, is it actually percolating down, and is it getting simplified from an execution perspective there? I think the point that you spoke about contract enforcement, typically that's one of the areas where India lags significantly, given that almost they say by a study that on average it takes about more than 1400 days for a contract enforcement in India, when you compare that with New Zealand of about 200 odd days and China with about 500 odd days there. On a ranking of the enforcement, I think we are at almost 160 plus kind of a ranking there. So that's again an important area to look at. Mohan, if I come to you, given this context, when you look at from a chemical sector perspective, what will be, let's say, 3-4 prerequisites, for India to truly emerge, from a global manufacturing hub perspective, from a chemical sector perspective?
So if you look at the overall chemical sector, I would start by giving credit to a couple of areas in the chemical sector which has done well. So if you look at the knowledge-based life sciences industry, whether it is agrochemicals or pharmaceutical intermediates or formulation manufacturing in the generic space, here India as a country has done well, both in the context of domestic business as well as exports worldwide. Now, how have we done that? We've more or less become part of the global supply chain. We are supplying very heavily into the Americas, into the especially South America. I think is a big market for many of our ag players, and also wherever the non-regulated pharma, we do quite well. Now, why do we do that? Because we have reasonably good people. We have good understanding of those manufacturing processes. They are complex processes, multi-steps, and we manage it extremely well. The right people, the right technologies available, and we have the entrepreneurs who have invested in this over a longer period of time. Now, when you look at that value chain, of both pharma and ag, we are heavily dependent on countries like China or even Western Europe or North America for the intermediates. All the building blocks, they need to come from everywhere. Now, I give that as an example because we always claim we are successful in the space of pharma and ag. But when you now translate that into the entire chemical industry, during the pandemic, we also were exposed because many of these intermediates were simply not available in the country. Yeah. And now if India has to become a global manufacturing hub in the chemical arena as a whole, now we don't have so much oil and gas as natural resources. So obviously the refinery inputs would come from somewhere in like the Middle East, or we would get it from somewhere. But then once you cross the refinery step and get into the chemical space, building up of those value chains, how do we get to the point that you come? I don't see us becoming independent of the world value chain. So you have to be part of the value chain in the world. But there are certain areas where India has a critical mass to set up its own manufacturing hub and also be part of the export train. Where we have a certain possibility in the context of scale. Now, what we need to do, of course, there is have the right environment around. So if you look at power, we have some of the most expensive power on this planet. Yeah, we talked about logistics costs. Logistics in the chemical framework can absolutely kill you, which is where most successful chemical parks, there are networks built. I mean, if you look at Antwerp, if you look at Jurong Island in Singapore, these are all places where you have an anchor investor with on a particular value chain of chemistry, and then many of the smaller companies around it or mid-sized companies building an entire industrial framework. So I would say it's something where we can do that. We have had success stories, and if we are to build these kind of infrastructures in terms of chemical parks, which has government as well as private participation in the context of infrastructure of how do you manage the environmental topics, the effluent treatment plants, how well they work, what kind of power you have, what kind of logistics frameworks you have, the pipeline networks that you require across these places. So I think that's the kind of environment we need to make sure that, in the chemical space, we are able to tackle these topics.
That's great. So Sandeep, let me come to you. I think the 2 points which Mohan raised as well was from a right people and right tech perspective, which has helped in the other 2 sectors that he spoke about in terms of the especially on the knowledge-based life sciences part of it there. From your perspective, when you look at the medical industry, from the perspective there, healthcare industry overall. So how do you think the government, industry, and the academia, right, can synergize their efforts to bring the healthcare industry, from a skill gap that is there in India?
Yeah, well, thank you, Neeraj, and it's wonderful to hear perspectives from material sciences, automotive, and chemicals. So switching gear here in terms of healthcare, if there's anything that COVID has taught us, right, is that resiliency in healthcare is just so critical for national security and for economic growth. And again, on the surface, Neeraj, as I reflect on your question, healthcare skills gap conversation may not have much to do with manufacturing, right? But it is the biggest leading indicator or a driver of demand for medical devices and healthcare. And we have to address, the following 5 factors. Number 1 is that there's no doubt that there's insatiable demand for healthcare. Number 2, there's a critical shortage of healthcare professionals in this country. Number 3 is that we have to skill and upskill labor. As we're thinking about manufacturing, the labor for medical devices, if we want to even transform from low value medical devices and equipment like gloves and to high tech, med tech instrumentation and devices like robotics. Number 4 is we have to create this robust ecosystem of a very skilled and trained supplier base, which is the echo I'm hearing on this in this conversation, is that the supplier-based resiliency, right? And then number 5 is that really increasing a very less spoken topic in India, but nevertheless very important, is increasing the diversity with female gender participation in manufacturing and lessons from other industries, including automotive and chemicals. So let me just break it down quickly. Number 1 is the demand for healthcare. We will have an insatiable demand for healthcare with the increasing burden of non-communicable diseases like cancer, cardiovascular conditions, but also as we continue to fight communicable diseases, which, by the way, COVID was an example of that. Now, this can be addressed through multiple investments. The government of India's budget is, at least step in the right direction to get us to a 2.5% to 3% investment in terms of our GDP. And it doesn't come as a surprise that the healthcare infrastructure spend, Neeraj, is 150,000 to 160,000 hospital beds are being added every year over the next 8 to 10 years. So that's number 1. Number 2 is just the shortage of skilled professionals. Again, is shocking. We are the country with one of the lowest doctor to patient ratios. 0.7 doctors and 1.5 nurses per 1,000 people compared to almost double the standards as mandated by WHO. And if we look at the graduates that are passing from our medical colleges as well, there's an opportunity to upskill them so that they have that standardized quality that they can deliver, especially as the care is moving to smaller parts of India. And that's where many of the global manufacturers are also setting up bases. And they're bringing in talent, and the talent seeks healthcare. but we don't have advanced healthcare in these epicenters or manufacturing hubs. So that is an issue and that we can solve for. Then the third piece is need to skill and upskill what I call the medical labor for transformation to medtech. And here we can accelerate adding skills programs for technicians and assistants right from high school. Neeraj, we catch them later, after school. Why can't we put programs in high school that are vocational tech training programs, particularly around health tech? So Health Sector Skills Council has embarked on it. And as industry, we have to invest in ongoing training, including adherence to quality, especially quality management systems and compliance standards. Those are the two missing links in India. And we have to, I'm sorry to say this, we have to change our chalta hai culture, when it comes to upskilling our labor. Number 4 is supplier base. And I know it's a common pain point here. Just to put things in perspective for this panel, for this panel here, medical devices is not developed in India. We have a fragmented ecosystem of 800 manufacturers. And to put things in perspective, 90% of these 800 manufacturers have a turnover of 7 million annually, Neeraj. 90% of medtech players in India have a turnover of 7 million annually. And now you think about their supplier bases that are further fragmented and even smaller. And now the expectations of them to comply with quality standards and compliance standards, world-class compliance standards. It's not feasible, it's not practical. So this is where medtech and pharma can learn from automotive. And Gunter, you're going to get a call from me in creating, a robust ecosystem of high quality tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 consolidated supplier base, integrating them into internal quality management systems, compliance training programs, and then of course, manufacturing process excellence, right? And the final point, which is close to my heart, is around women occupying leadership in manufacturing in India. We have women today, it is proven, right, that women that occupy even 30% of leadership positions on boards, those boards are 15% more profitable than companies with no women leadership, right? And here we are compared to 27 female participation in India, which is already low by global standards. Healthcare has only 11% participation. So this, I think, is a great opportunity for us to increase that participation of women in health sector, in R&D and manufacturing. Gunter, please feel free to add here.
Absolutely. Gunter, I was just about to come to you that, and then I would request Ramesh as well, while we wanted to discuss the R&D with you, Ramesh, but would be good to kind of get your views on the, one on the chemical sector and just overall as well. Gunter, first to you from auto industry, from, I think Sandeep has raised some very interesting points, in terms of what are the few challenges and also what's been done well also. So your views on it?
I don't like to cover everything that has been mentioned by Sandeep, but since he has actually mentioned that he is going to call me the coming days, and shortly after he talked about the supply base, I thought I'd possibly pick up this particular topic because that's something very close to my heart, and you might know that I have been driving the strategic supplier-based development at Tata Motors very strongly, heavily the last 4 years. And was, I would say, a good success, but for exactly the same reasons you have mentioned, because the supplier base was extremely fragmented. We had lots of very small suppliers. I'll just give you a reference. I inherited more than 1,300 suppliers when I joined 5 years ago. Today we are at the level, and they were all more or less in a flat structure. So literally they all called themselves a so-called tier 1 supplier, because we were the ones who actually consolidated and built the structure and the components with high added value at our plants within Tata Motors. Not sustainable, not competitive, not comparable with the development in the rest of the world, but not as a recent development in the industry. This development has taken place, and Neeraj, you know it, because you know the industry and its development for decades. In the meanwhile, this is something that has happened globally 2 decades ago. So we are significantly running behind as far as the global development is concerned. And how would you like to be globally competitive on technology, but also as far as the commercial robustness of your supply chain is concerned, if you actually work with such kind of partners, which neither meet the basic requirements on the technical nor on the commercial side. Today, we have 400 suppliers who we consider first-tier suppliers. If I go one level deeper, because this is Tata Motors commercial vehicle and passenger vehicles, but in particular in passenger vehicles, we still have some products which are now in production for more than a decade. Less so on the basis of the recent renewal of the PV product portfolio on the PV side. But if I take the recently launched Altroz, the first vehicle on the new architecture on which we are going to build the majority of our future products, including powertrain, have actually 120 suppliers. And these 120 suppliers have all been very carefully selected. They all meet global standards as far as their technical capabilities, so engineering footprint on ground, on material product design, but also on process capability. And at the same point of time, they are commercially sound. So they have the working capital that's required. They have the opportunity to take engineering tasks in an early stage of the product development, which is a prerequisite to actually build long-term sustainable partnerships and to actually leverage the opportunity of products which are much more modular in design in order to build economies of scale. It also required lots of changes internally, early engagement of the suppliers, supplier contracts, even without having the commercial terms fixed, putting a should costing cell in place in order to do a calculation of what a particular part against design process requirements is supposed to cost at the end of the product development as they actually go into production. A clear evaluation on the quality requirements on the one side, logistic requirements on the other side. That's a different world. It's a global world, but I think for India, we have made a significant change. And just listening to all of us, I think we would be somewhat interchangeable on our jobs, because yes, the topic would change, which we all provide to our customers, but the themes on which we would run the companies would be literally the same. So if we don't make reference to the businesses we are in, if it is health, chemical, or SVM, I think nobody would actually see for which industry we actually stand up and what kind of position we represent. So this is how close we are. And that's the reason why I said earlier, people always say it would be great if the automotive industry gets united. But on the topics we have just discussed, I think we need to get united as an industry body that goes beyond automotive, that goes beyond chemicals, because there is a lot out for us, in it for us, but out for us in order to be resolved in a very concerted and well-aligned effort. And that would actually bring everything into full play, because as you mentioned earlier, yes, automotive represents 49% of the manufacturing-related GDP, 8% of the total GDP. What is 80% of the total GDP? If we would actually throw all of our GDP contribution in one basket, our position would be even stronger. And I think this is what we need. We need to get united with the government in order to make the right calls and to really address the key pain points. It's funny to sit here and to listening to the health sector, and all of a sudden I hear something about the pain point is logistics and the supplier base. Thanks a lot. Your statistic has not necessarily given me great level of comfort living in India, but I do hope if it comes to the point, I can come back to you and can give you a call for advice.
So with that note, Ramesh, since it's an important topic, there. So maybe your quick comments on the skill aspect of it, and then we'll move to research and development, another area.
Sure. And I think both of them spoke extensively and quite expansively about this topic. But I think the whole concept of critical mass is the one I wanted to just point out. Even if you look at the macro level, as an economy as a whole, I think there is a statistic out there which says that there are barely 20,000 companies or so which has a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. So if you raise the bar to, let's say, 100 crores like paid up capital or 500 crores, etc., and that number of companies who meet that threshold is going to drop off precipitously, right? It's going to drop off dramatically. So which goes to the point that the base is relatively narrow. And I think the capacity for all of these companies to invest and develop skills that are required, not only for themselves, but also for their supplier base, I think it's a dramatic and huge challenge. Now, yes, there are several partnerships that are going on right now between industry bodies. So I represent CII as well as my other hat. So, there is the Institute of Quality and several initiatives that industry bodies take to promote skills development amongst member companies and companies at large. There are the partnerships with ITIs that was put in place some years ago. So there are a number of initiatives, but then I think it's a fact that there are only a few companies that can afford to take in absolutely raw graduates or raw students into the workforce, train them, mold them, and make them productive employees. So I think it's a much larger question because of the fragmentation of our industry itself and the fact that we don't have the critical mass to do everything. So partnerships become very important. I love looking at the SDGs. And then if you look at the SDG number 17, what does it say? It's all about partnerships, right? I think this topic brings home that point in spades. Yeah.
So moving on to research and development, which also plays a fundamental role in fostering innovation. And also when you look at China, their rise in innovation prowess can also be attributed to the increase that they've had in the expenditure as well. They were, at some point in time, they were less than 1% is what they were investing maybe about 20 years back. And today the expenditure is more than 2%, what they do. So in your view, Ramesh, are there any lessons to learn or areas to replicate, from China's manufacturing success, given that innovation and R&D also would be one of the, important parameters for Make in India? And when you answer that, maybe you want to just contrast it from a MSME sector perspective as well, which is also constrained by capital and scale issue that you were bringing about from a skill perspective.
Sure, that's a great question. So let me first give a couple of perspectives, probably from a couple of different angles. One is I'll talk a little bit about scale, which I think I just spoke about also in the previous comment. And the other is, of course, the criticality of investments in R&D and innovation at large. First is talking about scale. Let's look at what we are trying to achieve as a country. There is already a stated aspiration out there of a $5 trillion economy, in a few years to come. And there is also the target that we have to increase the manufacturing intensity in the economy. I think it's 15% or thereabouts now. We want to take it to 20, 25%. So, without getting into the specifics of the math, even a back of the envelope arithmetic says that, we need to, this path means we need about $500 to $800 billion more of value add coming from manufacturing over the next several years, whatever the time frame you want to pick. And that's a pretty massive increase in value add we are talking about, 500 to 800 billion. And then I just made the comment earlier, I won't repeat it, about the fact that we barely have a few companies which have the scale, 20,000 companies with 10 crores paid up capital. If you go to 100 or 500 crore paid up capital, it's far less. So the question is, if you want to deliver these 500 to 800 billion dollars of incremental value add, we need to build more scale and size in the economy, in the industry at large. That's number one. And that scale will also afford companies to invest in R&D, amongst other things. And this is an opportunity, obviously, not only for domestic companies, but also for foreign enterprises in India. Now, the PLI schemes is a great way to provide the impetus to invest in manufacturing, but to build a sustainable competitive advantage over the long term, it's very important to build moats, moats around differentiators, whether it's quality, whether it's new technologies, whether it's, you can look at productivity, etc. You could look at moats from different angles, but it's very critical to invest in new technologies to build those moats. And a well thought out R&D strategy and R&D investment strategy should complement a manufacturing strategy. Otherwise, you could end up becoming, at the low end of the value chain, and not capturing enough of the value addition in the entire end-to-end process. Now, you referenced China in your question. So I think it was back in 2014 or 15, this Made in China 2025 was launched in China. The key components of those are well known. I mean, key high technology sectors were identified, and they were identified to be the future drivers of growth for China. And there was also a strong focus on investing in R&D to make that happen. And in these emerging sectors that they had identified, and then transform the country to really become a technology leader. I mean, that was broadly how they approached the whole Made in China 2025 key sectors, whether it's new energy vehicles, aerospace, whether it's semiconductors and so on. In India, although our overall investment in R&D might be 0.6, 0.7% to GDP, I do believe that we can take a differentiated approach to our prioritized sectors. We don't have to get trapped in this headline number of 0.6, 0.7, because, as we know, we all run in our companies, we prioritize and we allocate resources to the best opportunities that we have. And I think we should be looking at it the same way. Otherwise, we could be sitting here waiting for a long time to be able to get that to, whatever percentages that we want. We benchmark with South Korea, we benchmark with other countries. So I think and basically, at a minimum, we need to look at investments in 3 fundamental levels in R&D, even taking from examples from our own company. One, of course, is in basic sciences, which is, you can look at it as the equivalent of innovation risk capital. So somewhere you've got to find a way to, what is the best way to fund, allocate, and to find the source of that capital. Government might have a role to play, institutions might have a role to play, etc. The second is utilizing our basic sciences and engineering for technology platform development. How do you develop platforms of different technologies using these basic sciences? And third is R&D investments, again, for leveraging these technology platforms for product development and problem solving, along with, of course, innovations in business model. So I think this kind of, when you can take this approach to a prioritized sectors, and these need not be restricted by what is called out in the PLIs right now, the 12, 13 sectors that are called out. It could be technologies of the future, it could be markets of the future. So we could take a very thoughtful approach to this and see how do we get resources, R&D investments, and create that ecosystem we talk about into these sectors. This will further I think this will further strengthen our Make in India goals as well, by concurrently developing our whole capabilities in India. And of course, in doing all this, you can never do it all alone. You do leverage global knowledge. Right. So that would be my take on it. Yeah.
Sure. So Gunter, you raise your hand as well. So of course, come to you. May I just ask you for one more angle to it, to say that what Ramesh talked about, the fact like the innovation risk capital, you need a lot of patient capital as well, for any development of a new technology of the future. And overseas, we find this phenomena coming in more. There's established model that the government would kind of work with the industry, and then the industry would work with academia to kind of build the technology of the future. In India, largely the grants and funds are towards the industry, academia, and then the academia picks up, to work with the industry there. So is there a particular way that you see that we could follow through an established model which has been used overseas for technology development of the future?
Was a question to me, Neeraj?
Ramesh, if you could give a quick comment on it, and then we can move to Gunter.
Sure. Yeah, I think at the even if you look at the government, look at our principal scientific advisor, that they're all talking about this, and there are mechanisms that are being developed, being put in place to operationalize just what you spoke. But yes, the model here has been more through academia, academic institutions, and then having the partnerships with the industry to commercialize or even take it to the next, to develop the basic technologies into useful products and applications. Okay, how quickly or how well we can pivot from that model into a different model, I'm not so sure. but definitely I don't see why both the models cannot exist parallelly. Yeah.
Okay, Kuntal, to you.
If you don't mind, I just would like to add one point, because there was a teaser. What I heard, you didn't say it explicitly, make in India. You didn't say, but you talked about design in India. And just as a thought for our conversation, look around and make up your mind how many, in particular in automotive, for example, how many of the vehicles actually run on the Indian roads could actually claim an indigenous design? Or even on the component, on the module level, an indigenously designed component. But at the same point of time, if you look around, you find that lots of the multinationals who are active on ground in India, do have the offshore development centers. So why is it that we actually export the brain through the offshore development centers, but do not build the capability on ground in India and do not actually force the multinationals to actually build indigenous solutions for the benefit of the Indian industry? So it's also, if you look into the IPs, it's a fair representation. Do we actually get the maximum from the intellectual capability, intellectual power that's available in India? Or do we just make the intellectual capability something for export? So are we more an intellectual capability export hub than a manufacturing hub where we translate indigenized solution for global opportunities? Just as a question, I think this is something where India has a long way to travel and needs to play its intellectual capabilities much more effectively in favor of the country. It's for me like a company that has lots of raw material, but just exports the raw material instead of doing something out of the raw material and putting added value to it. This is for me the same when we take the Indian talent as far as engineering, in particular software engineering, is concerned.
So Mohan, that kind of leads in very nicely, to the question which I had as well. And of course we'll take your comment on this. So the question that I had for you was more in terms of the global supply chains. When you look at the country's participation, and then Gunther brought up the point that that we are on the value addition point of view, our value additions have been lower, side of it there. So and if you put it differently, then our participation is more with the backward linkage than with the forward linkages around it. So how do you see this landscape evolving over the next 2 through 3 years, from your industry perspective, or a broad span of 3 to 5 years, there?
Maybe I go back a little bit, because
Sure.
with this research topic, the innovation topic, in a layman's language, what I always say in my company is that it's very difficult to come up with research and innovation when you don't know how to manufacture. So the problem where lies in the fact that when we decided as an economy to jump from ag to services, we somehow missed the important step of manufacturing. So an entire generation of us grew up consuming things not knowing how it is made. Nobody thought about it. What does it take to make this stuff? If you were consuming, it's because somewhere you earned the money out of some services and then you bought it from some market in the world who made it. And you brought the question about research in China and why is China able to strategize into these priority sectors and able to get the people to do it. Because for the last 45 years, they have set up this engineering and manufacturing from the ground. And they have got an entire generation of people who know how to a nut and a bolt works. And I'm sure a large population in this country doesn't know how these things work. So that's the take. But now it's not all dull and gloom. Now I'm not here to sell the dull and gloom. The fact is that as an economy, yes, we have woken up. The government has woken up and said we aspire to get to the 5 trillion and a trillion in manufacturing and so on. So there's an aspiration. Are we going to do it in 2 to 3 years? Exactly your question. No, we are not going to do this in 2 to 3. We are not going to reach where China achieved in 40 years in 2 to 3 years. This is a generation kind of a thing. We need to work through it. Now, do we need to take the same number of years? No, we don't need to take the same number of years, because technology is changing. I mean, in my own sector, the kind of energy, the whole energy equations are transforming. The digital ways of manufacturing or robotics. So we don't necessarily have to go through all the steps at the same slow speed. We will have to learn the basics, sure, but we can do it faster. Yeah. So I don't see it in 2 to 3 years, but if you take more or less a strategic horizon, 10, 15 years, probably then we could come up to a point where we are in that league. Yeah. Now, what do we need to do? Yes, we need to do invest into manufacturing to a large extent. Now, again, so in between there was this topic about MSMEs, and in the old days we had the SSI culture. I'm not against that, and I think it's pretty much part of an ecosystem. When you build an ecosystem, you need companies of all sizes. Yeah, but you cannot be in a position where you only support subscale through artificial trade barriers, and thereby have no incentive to be globally competitive. So if you want to win a battle or even be equals in a global manufacturing setup, you need corporations which are able to compete globally without those trade barriers. And that comes with investments in competitiveness, it comes with investments in technology, it comes with investments in people. So that's something which I really vouch for, and it's something which we as a country need to do. And I'm very confident that if we do these things, not in 2 to 3 years, but 10 to 15 years, you will see a perspective where we can be part of global supply chains, we can be part of global value chains to a larger extent.
So Sandeep, coming to you, Mohan raised certain points around the fact that why we are not part of the global value chain, and then I had raised the point as well to say that we are from a forward linkage perspective or complex manufacturing aspect of it, we are not so much there, and medical devices would fall into that category of an advanced manufacturing, complex manufacturing aspect of it. So when you look at the conversation that you had, and also contrast this or let's say zoom into more from a medical devices perspective, if India is aspiring to be a global hub for medical devices, what are the few things which the government should be looking at, and as industry, how we get for that?
I think, again, as I had mentioned, Neeraj, our industry, medtech, right now is a very small industry, in India. So you're looking at somewhere around $7 to $8 billion. That's about it. With the potential to double, triple, based on a few fundamental drivers that have to go into place, right? And even when you look at the manufacturing that happens, is low value add. And 86% of your medical devices today are imported. There are companies like MNCs, for all the reasons that have been discussed before, that have made investments into India, but have not scaled up to become export powerhouses. So what are some of the ways to kind of get there? So number one is, like we touched before, is really the infrastructure. Creating, for us, it's very important to have dedicated zones where we can bring in innovation and capabilities. So dedicated medtech zones. I know there are pharma bulk drug parks are being set up, and they literally are these infrastructure facilities that have common utilities, common facilities. You have common power plant units, steam generators, waste, effluent management, water treatment systems, sterilization units. I had to put a sterilization unit into our plant here in India because we couldn't find one outside, right? So imagine the smaller companies that cannot afford to do that, and a sterile medical device is a necessity, right? If it's going to be put into a patient. So those kind of fundamentals, cold chain, when you're thinking vaccines, cold chain transport, common supplier basis. So I think creating that ecosystem in healthcare parks, pharma bulk drug parks, that's number one. Number two, I think we have to get to simplifying our tax structure and building on the momentum of the GST reform. I think GST reform has been good, where it's given some sort of structure. It's reduced the logistics in many ways, but I think there's more to be done here in terms of simplifying to two rates, whether it's 12%, 18%, or other rates, and no exception other than zero rated items. There's also an opportunity to bring in energy, petrol, power into the GST. So I'd say simplifying the tax structure will be another one. The third piece of this is the overall connectivity. For us to logistics costs, we've been discussing logistics. Logistics costs are such a big burden on our P&Ls, and for us to have a simplified, a well-connected network, whether you have, and I think a lot of progress is being made. You're looking at dedicated freight rail corridors that are being put together, connecting the east to west and north to south. You're looking at daily national highway constructions that are happening, 75 kilometers or so per day last year. More airports into tier 2, tier 3. For us, Neeraj, patients are seeking care closer to home. COVID has made patients' care seek closer to home. There are more cardiovascular surgeries happening in cities like Lucknow than they're happening in urban centers like Gurgaon, right? And what happens there is you need that connectivity to airports. You need that connectivity, or even the flow of goods wherever you're manufacturing. Yeah, the multimodal networks that were brought up on logistics, whether it's roll, rail, air, sea, that has to come to fruition as well. Creating ecosystems of domestic MNCs and MSMEs. I know it's a sore topic here, but an ecosystem approach, because end of the day, you cannot set up all capabilities as MNCs. So creating that ecosystem, creating a robust supplier base is another point, Neeraj, that we have to do. And from an R&D perspective, getting incentives, I think the Department of Pharmaceuticals has done a phenomenal job here to set a tone around investing in medical devices. It's given production-linked incentives, but I think more needs to be done to really accelerate things for MedTech India.
So with this, I know we are kind of running out of time, but with you gentlemen there, just want to end with a note from your perspective to say that when we know Japan is kind of known for quality, German for precision, and Chinese for scale. That's what comes to our minds usually. So when you look at Indian manufacturing in the years to come, what do you think will define Indian manufacturing? And do you see your industry going that way? A quick 30 to 45 second view, starting Ramesh with you, then going to Mohan, Gunter, and Sandeep.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. I don't know if I can come up with a pithy line, but I think Gunter said it. We are an engineering talent. We are strong engineering capabilities and talent in the country. Strong software capabilities, and now with the merge, with the confluence of manufacturing, industry 4.0, Internet of Things and services. So I think engineering, software, all of this comes together. I think we should be the engineering capital of the world, and really accelerate manufacturing, leveraging those capabilities to building companies at scale in India, which are globally competitive. So I need to work on it to wordsmith it so that I can come up with a simple pithy line.
Sure, Mohan, on to you.
So from the manufacturing industry and the chemical industry perspective, I see that we are more or less where the West was probably in the 60s in terms, if you draw an S curve of economic development and the manufacturing, that's where I see ourselves, or the Japanese were probably in the 70s and 80s. Now, my philosophy there is rather simple. We don't have to first create the gray skies and then try to transform into the blue skies. In the context of power, in the context of energy, in the context of chemicals, going the way in a sustainable manner, making sure that we don't go through the entire learning curve, but bypass some of those and get into low carbon footprint products and low carbon footprint technologies, and having the sustainability at the core of it, and developing an industry and the ecosystem which connects largely, and has very little waste and transforms waste into products which can be used by the next in the value chain. So that's something, again, I don't have the perfect words for it on short notice, but sustainability at the middle of everything that we do is what I see for the chemical industry and manufacturing industry.
Great. Gunter, to you. Quick closing comment.
Mohan has actually delivered me the keyword for my statement, sustainability. So I also do believe that sustainability is going to be the challenge in the years to come. I do believe that the future of automotive is electric. And if India is going to be known focusing on the electrification for having demonstrated the ability to rise to the occasion, to actually rise to the need of electronics, leveraging the software capabilities, as already mentioned by Ramesh. And we have all of these capabilities in much larger numbers than anybody else in the world. And at the same point of time, we could join hands and could invest in a dedicated manner following the government's phased manufacturing plan as part of FAME 2, investing in electric vehicle components, e.g. batteries, for example, and many others in the same context, then I think India is going to be known in a couple of years as the global hub for electric vehicles in the passenger vehicle space as well as for commercial vehicles. It looks like a dream today, but I think we can rise to the occasion and can really demonstrate that this country has a unique capability, and that's leapfrogging. And I believe in the leapfrogging capability as far as e-mobility is concerned.
Thanks. Sandeep, over to you. You've got the benefit of the three people speaking, so I'm looking forward to that punchline as well.
No, it comes down. Look, we're the most second most populated country in the world, and we keep talking about how many people we have. But I think the bigger thing is what Ramesh was saying here. We are our value proposition can be access to world-class human capital. You think in healthcare, second largest pool of pharma and biotech talent after China, the number of PhDs we have, and yet we are grossly underrepresented in research and development. And that's the fundamental disconnect. And that to me is a much larger opportunity, regardless of the sector. So for us, if India can tap into really maximizing this world-class human capital and getting it focused on solving the issues for what drives India's innovation as well as global priorities. So if it's making India a pharma capital of the world, specialty pharma, not just generic pharma. If it means making India from a 1.8% market share player in medtech to a significant 20% player on value add medtech. Electric vehicles, like Gunter said, if it's automobiles, not low cost, old technology cars selling in value add markets, but next generation electric vehicles. So putting a stake, I think, on the really the value drivers for global economy that are going to shape the global economy and putting our minds and brains across all sectors. The problems are the same across all sectors towards it. So I would put my bet on a world-class human capital.
And I would kind of agree to say that if you see the amount of engineering and R&D centers, which have been now established in India over the last few years from a India perspective, from global companies, there's been a tremendous increase, which has happened on that, and there's a huge potential for India to. While we discussed R&D in a good amount of detail, but that's an area where more work can happen. So with this, I thank you all, for sharing your valuable insights. I know, no time is enough to get the knowledge, from all four of you with, very different industries. I think we had a very different perspectives coming in, all pointing out towards the fact that, India definitely needs to kind of emerge as a manufacturing hub. There's a good potential for that. And to be able to get there, we need a combination of perhaps, the investor-friendly environment, right policy interventions, enabling productivity-led educational ecosystem, and also faster development of infrastructure, which kind of got emphasized on the panel multiple times. And I would say that what Gunter said in the middle, relentless focus on implementation of these policies that the government has done up there. And if I just add, I think what Sandeep has said on the the taxation part of it also, I think the predictability of the taxation environment, predictability of the policies is another area where it would help the overseas companies to kind of look at India as one of the larger manufacturing destinations, and for all of us to be proud that we would emerge as a global manufacturing hub for some select sectors for sure. With that, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights with all of us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.